right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you attending our session. So my name is Amber Cardillo, and I lead the Solution-Defined Architecture team in the SDE division at Broadcom. And today I'm joined by our partners at NTT, Al Dowski, who is the head of the compute infrastructure for the GIN network, and Mike Wilson, senior systems design architecture engineer. And we are going to be talking a lot about the 90s today to begin with, and talk about their digital evolution from the 90s until today. I have a quick question for the audience. What is your favorite thing from the 90s? Anything stand out? Music? What did you say?
Phones without cameras.
Phones without cameras. Wow, I don't even remember that. What else? Nirvana? Nirvana. Good, good. Well, we're going to, again, talk about 90s. We'll be hearing a lot about the 90s. And I need to show you this first. And I think you've all saw this morning if you were at the big session, but give you a few minutes just to look that over, our disclaimer. And a little bit about the software-defined edge division, in case you're not familiar. So we are broken up into three different product sets. Edge compute stack, you heard a little bit about that this morning with the edge. The intelligent overlay, which is really our SD-WAN SASE solution. And then what we're going to be talking about today is all around the network. So we're going to focus in on that bottom layer. And what I wanted to start with is many of our customers have gone through digital transformation. In fact, probably every single one of you in your room has gone through some form of digital transformation. And what we have found with our customers is that they have similar questions that we help them work through. One of them being, how do you reduce the number of tools and processes within your network? Another one, all around security. Security is so important. So how do you deliver on security without slowing down the delivery process? And then infrastructure. How do you scale your infrastructure without any downtime? And then lastly, on the business side, how do you improve cost and performance and optimize your infrastructure? So these are questions that we help our customers answer through what's called a future state design, architecture, and vision engagement. And if you haven't done that with your account team yet, I highly recommend it. It's something that we're going to talk to NTT about today and our journey with them from that perspective. So one of the big things that we wanted to make sure that we adhere to, which is something that's very important to NTT, is to continue to provide a 100% SLA uptime for their customers. And with that in mind, automation becomes key. So we're going to be talking about automation, adopting a zero-touch provisioning approach for day one, and lifecycle management also becomes key. So again, we're going to be talking about that. So when we went through this future state vision and architecture together and partnered with that, we positioned VMware Telco Platform. So we landed on using some of the benefits now in NTT's environment and then having them consume some of those benefits over time. So some of those benefits include increased performance and scalability, and that's both from an infrastructure as a service perspective, container as a service, and moving to a real software-defined network architecture approach. Having simplicity through automation, so there's a lot of vendors out there that, especially in NTT's network, that we have to integrate with and make sure that you have that simplicity through automation in a multi-vendor, multi-network environment. Service assurance, so having the ability to have a single pane of glass for root cause analysis and closed loop remediation. And then lastly, being able to support all of those partners and existing vendors within the network architecture that both NTT has and as many of our customers have across the world. We've partnered with thousands across the world in our deployments. So with that, I would like to play a short video on who NTT DATA is before we get started. So Al, that was a very short video of what NTT does and very high level. Can you explain to the audience a little bit more about who NTT DATA is?
Sure, and that'll take the rest of our session because NTT is a really big company. So if I can give you the very, very quick view, NTT DATA is a $30 billion IT and telecommunications powerhouse. We provide cloud services, managed services, business process transformation services, private 5G. We work with a lot of partners, including Broadcom. We are one of the very few pinnacle-level Broadcom partners in North America. And across NTT DATA, we have over 4,000 certifications on VMware products. We happen to have the third largest data center footprint in the world. And as you just saw, we have the NTT DATA Global IP Network, one of our crown jewels and the highest quality IP backbone on the planet.
Thanks. So now we're going to talk about history, and we're going to go back to the 90s. And I just want to level set, back in the back at the beginning of time when the internet was fully launched. We fast forward to the 90s, and that's when everyone started using the internet, and that's really when NTT's journey began with building their backbone across the whole world. Can you talk to us about that history?
So Amber's already touched on it. You're going to hear this a bunch today, but back to the 90s. And really, I think most folks here know that the internet really started to take off in the 90s. That's when a lot of the tech revolution began. So have the appropriate graphic, which is 90s inspired, and you're going to hear us say it a bunch today. But let's take a step back to 1991. Early 1991, the internet in North America looked like this. This was the NSFnet backbone, composed of T1 circuits. I know some of you can tell me this. How big is a T1? How much bandwidth does a T1 have?
1.544 megabits.
Yep, 1.544 megabits. That was our national backbone in 1991. Now, what's really interesting for us and for the NTT piece and why I put this up here was the 5 locations with stars. So those companies, those nodes, were purchased by a company called Vareo, along with 50 others, and rolled up into a company called, Vareo, rolled up into a national entity in 1997, 1998. Vareo had an investor many of us are familiar with, NTT. So we worked together to start rolling out a national network to replace all the companies that we built up and nationalize systems as well. In 2000, NTT purchased Vareo outright and rebranded as NTT Vareo. We then went from being a national backbone in the United States to being a global backbone, going to Asia, Europe, and Australia. And we continued to grow with circuits like OC12s, 600 megabits per second, and grow our network across the planet. In the 2010s, we had 10 gigabit circuits, lots and lots and lots of 10 gigabit circuits. And eventually, as technology advanced, we went to 100 gigabit circuits. And now today, in 2024, we're on 5 continents, moving terabits per second of traffic across our global network, providing customer connections from 1 gig up to 400 gigs, which is kind of crazy if you think about the national backbone being 1.5 megabits. We're moving 1 million plus times that on our network, and customers can buy 400 gigabits, which is like 400,000 times that. So pretty wild advance in not that long of a period of time.
So safe to say, most everyone in this room has had their internet traffic run across your IP backbone.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah. So I want to go back to when we first met and we talked about your team's charter, again, was to continue to provide that 100% SLA uptime to your customers, which is something very hard to achieve in the industry. Can you walk us through what you've done to achieve that?
So we have two focuses, an excellent network and excellent customer service. So one of the things that was mentioned in the video that I just wanted to highlight for folks is that, somewhat unusual for our industry, when you call into our NOC, you don't get triaged. You can talk directly to an engineer who's going to fix your problem. And whether you're a small customer or a huge customer buying hundreds of connections from us, you're still going to talk to that person who will debug your problems, work with you, and fix the issue, rather than having you continually be transferred or anything else. The other piece of that, of course, is the quality of the network. And Jerry asked me a couple of years ago, how many nines are on your network? And I said 0, because we guarantee that our service is free of outages 100% of the time. That is our SLA to our customers for uptime. In addition, we have very stringent latency, packet loss, and jitter SLAs to ensure that the service you buy from us is incredibly high quality.
Oh, back to me. So we both tasked our teams to work on that future state vision and architecture together. I think it'd be great if you could talk to the audience about the process that we went through and where we ended up with the roadmap.
You bet. So Amber asked me to do this with her team, and I have to admit, I was a little bit skeptical at first, because we began talking about, well, not what's the future, not the fun, exciting stuff, but what's the current stuff. And it seemed kind of basic to us. Well, we know our current stuff, but Amber's team didn't. So we went through and reviewed all of our systems and documented everything for them, explained it to them, and realized, I'm sure you guys, every system you've ever built is perfectly documented. There's nothing that you've assumed, and that everyone knows everything. And yeah, but we weren't quite as lucky. So we went through this process and really defined, what are we using today? Where do we want to go? What are our systems using? And one thing that we found is, for our systems, and I'm fearing the slide may not be in here. Yeah, okay, so I got to fast forward a little bit. We have basically two different types of installations. So we have edge nodes around our network, and then we have compute clusters in a couple different data center locations. And really, we found that we were using different aspects of VMware software. And because we've been using them for well over a decade, we had kind of grown by accretion. So we were using some products in some places, some in others. We had vSphere everywhere, of course, right? Everyone has ESXi. But in some locations, we had vSAN. We had ARIA, using automation in areas, but not the full suite, not everywhere. And really, we didn't have a coherent platform and a coherent look at exactly how we could move forward with VMware products. After that, we talked to the Amber's team, and we were able to come through and basically look at, well, where do we go? We want to add on these features. Here's what we want to do. And we chose the Telco Cloud Platform, which provides a full stack with automation and containers, modern applications, service assurance, the whole 9 yards, everything Amber just talked about. It was really a great way forward for us. It allows us to have one set of products available across our network and to really have key automation technologies that let us move things forward.
Thanks, Al. I have a loaded question for you. What has been the key to your success at NTT DATA?
So the key to my team's success is automation, but the key to our network success is actually also automation. It's a big thing, right? So the holy grail in our industry is automation. And I told you I was going to say this again, but if we go back to the 90s, there's a couple of different pieces of how we've built our network. So starting at each POP, everything in a POP is redundant. Redundant routers, redundant switches, redundant ingress and egress points. Basically, a POP that has no single component that can fail. We then spread that out to our network. And because we were part of NTT, we were blessed to have some NTT fibers, NTT subsea cables, but we also use other vendors so that any connection, any 2 points in our network don't travel just across one path. And then finally, on top of that, we ensure that we engineer in sufficient capacity on the network. Back to the 90s, again, network automation. And this is one of the huge differentiators for the global IP network. So as we started to roll up those companies I mentioned back before, 55 different networks across the United States, it was obvious very quickly that having people log into routers and do administration didn't work. It didn't scale. It was error prone. So we started, as everybody did back then, writing a few scripts, and they pushed configs onto routers and began the network. And over time, this has developed into a fully fledged, internally developed application with a full team that maintains it, database backed, and it drives everything on our network today. All of our routing, our ACL generation, BGP prefixes, ports, who is using what ports, the customer interfaces, all that's driven out of this database software and directly pushed onto our network for a fully automated config. When our engineers need to do upgrades, it's completely automated, logging in the router, upgrading the router, moving customer circuits around, it's all upgraded. And all of it's driven through our software and through our automation, which has really, really improved the quality of our service by streamlining things, speeding up maintenances, allowing us to deploy customer circuits much more quickly, and reducing human error.
So you mentioned to me as well that the key to your success is your people.
Yes. So that's the other part, right? You can't just take anybody off the street and build up this technology. NTT, as a company, NTT DATA, fantastic staff, incredible engineers. The global IP network has people, some of us going back to the 90s that we've worked here, have built up an incredible team, incredibly talented engineers, full stack engineers on my team. I'm blessed to have some here today. Who are capable of doing pretty much anything I throw at them, whether it's detailed network debugging, writing software, automating systems, you name it. And with that, I'm going to hand off to one of my key engineers, Mike, and let him walk you through some of the exciting stuff that we've built in the past.
Thank you.
Mike, Al mentioned some of the tools and some of the processes. Can you elaborate in detail to our audience how you've automated your systems?
Yeah, so I can give you a long history of where we started. So like Al said, our story begins in the late 1990s, early 2000s. Back then, we were tasked with consolidating the infrastructure from his previous topics that he has mentioned, and we needed to bring those under one team. So we started with all bare metal machines. And as I'm sure all you know, building those systems by hand was a long process, fraught with problems, and not very scalable in a non-automated fashion. Also, after the system was up, we needed to continue to maintain certain processes on it. So we started working on our own configuration management system, which was Perl. Some of you guys may remember that. It's not used much anymore. And RSync, which had M4 configuration. So we were able to have a master server that would shuffle data around specific to what we needed all our older systems to have. Later on, we were able to implement Puppet, which really helped us move into a better stage of our configuration management. One of the things we learned, though, after a while was that each of our data centers had wall-to-wall racks filled from floor to ceiling with bare metal machines. And we needed to figure out a way to reduce that footprint significantly. So around the 2014, we began to look at virtualization technology. And for us, we chose VMware, and we deployed the hypervisors in all of our data centers. At the same time we were doing this, we began to develop our own Perl script system using the vSphere Perl SDK that allowed us to provision systems directly into that. It worked, unfortunately, extremely fragile, very difficult to manage and administer. So we continued to look for other tools. We also still had to do everything by hand, our DNS, our backups, our monitoring configurations, all of that. So we continued to look for a different solution. During that period, we also were upgrading our virtualization technology by instituting vSAN. vSAN really allowed us to consolidate our resource view and allow us to perform maintenance on systems that users were actively using. So we could go in and start working on a hypervisor. All those systems would be moved off. the user would not even know, they'd still be able to work, and we were able to perform our maintenance. And that really advanced our ability to not impact the end user while we were performing maintenance. Around that time, we discovered a tool called Foreman. Foreman is a GUI interface that is backed up by scripts that talks to our vSAN directly through a REST API. So it allowed us to provision directly to our vSAN. It had a very easy to manage administrative web tool. It also had a small request form that allowed the users to make a few choices and options. And this is also when we began first to integrate directly into our provisioning process, including Puppet, so they could have those options configured before the system was built. So, unfortunately, the system still required us to deal with our DNS systems, our backup systems, our monitoring systems, and we also began to look at security compliance tools. So we needed to integrate all those in our environment, and we weren't able to do that very easily. So we continued to look around, and as Al alluded to earlier, ARIA automation is what we were looking at. At the time, it was called vRealize Automation. It's changed since then to ARIA Automation, and sorry, I skipped the slide. If you look at the bottom of that slide, you can see they're changing the name again. So I will change, I may use the different names for each of those, and I apologize, but I've just been used to calling them that. So one of the first things we did whenever we started looking at VRA was to take the classes offered by VMware, and they were extremely helpful, teaching us how to install, how to manage, and how to maintain these systems. So we decided to build a proof of concept system with VRA. So the first thing that you install with VRA is the Lifecycle Manager. It allows you to install the other appliances within that system and continue to manage, update, and adjust them. The second piece was the Identity Manager, which allows you to provide authentication for the suite itself. The third piece is vRealize Automation itself. This is the administrator for provisioning of all your systems. And lastly, the part that we use the most in our environment is the orchestrator. It allows us to write custom workflows so that we could communicate directly to any of our third-party tools. Most of that is via REST API, and it's very standardized format. We also could use SSH tunneling if there was not a REST API provided. So we tested this system for about 3 to 4 months with various tools in our systems, putting it through different iterations, and decided at the end, this looks like something that would work perfect in our environment. So we began to work directly with VMware, and they gave us instructions on how to best deploy that system in our environment. And so we began to work directly with their professional services team to deploy vRealize 8.0 in our greenfield production environment. Once we had that deployed, we began to implement templates. Templates allow us to create a base start for each VM that is going to be created by a user. Also ensures that we can make sure that the operating system is the same, the keys are the same for our SSH access, our certificates, our systems users, everything is exactly the same. So we don't have a snowflake of systems once we have had this out for a couple of months and have to administrate those. It would just be untenable. The second part that we began to work on was workflows to communicate with all of our third-party tools. For example, info blocks, Puppet Enterprise, our backup system Veeam, our monitoring system, and our security compliance tools. So we wrote those tools so that they would be in place and ready to use. One of the features within vRealize Automation is the ability to create custom request forms. It allows you to completely customize the interface that your end users are going to access to build a system. So whenever the user connects, they will see the options that that particular tenant can see. We will list out several data centers that they have access to and say they would select a data center. What would happen on the back end is a workflow would be executed to communicate directly to our IPAM. Based on the site ID, we would return a list of, here's a list of VLANs, here's a list of networks, here's a list of domains, and then we would populate the options that are listed on that. So they can only see what is accessible and usable for that site, dynamically updating all of those menu selections. So once the user has selected all of their options and hit that submit button, it's not all over. We still got to run through the provisioning process. VRA will then begin to trigger events at separate stages of the provisioning system. One of the first ones is the network. For ours, it would trigger a workflow that would communicate again with our IPAM server and say, this user has requested an IP address for this network, so we will assign an IP address to that. Also, we would configure a host name record for that, so it's in DNS. But after the system is built, comes out on the other end, they are able to access all of those, they're able to log into that system directly using the host name that was created immediately, like we did at the beginning. During that same event process, we also configure our Puppet, our monitoring system, our backup system. We also notify our security compliance tools that the system is coming up and to keep an eye on it. And lastly, the system is provisioned onto our vSAN. But during the lifetime of a system, you still need to continue to manage that system. So we use another feature within vReli's automation called Day 2 Actions. In the Day 2 Actions, you are also able to have customized workflows. So we created one for our monitoring system. The users can log into that system and go in there and say, I want to schedule a downtime for next week. I'm going to be performing maintenance. I don't want to wake up the on-call guys during that time period. Also, they can take a snapshot of that system from the Day 2 site so that during that maintenance, if something goes wrong and it breaks, they can immediately revert back to a working state using the built-in features of VMware. We also allow them to adjust the backup settings as well as adjust disk sizes. So say you have a database administrator, he requested the site have 2 terabytes, and within 2 days, he's already filled it up and he needs more. So you can easily increase that for him. So later on, 4 weeks later, the database admin comes to you and says, look, we're done with the system. We're going to change to another host, and I would like for you to delete this system. So some other options that you have available within VRA is the ability to authorize particular actions within the system. So you can set up an authorization for provisioning a system. You can require it to go through your supervisors, your managers, your directors before they can create a system. The same way for deleting. So let's assume the system was approved to be deleted. And again, we go through another series of events that are triggered. And those triggers execute workflows that, again, will communicate with our third-party tools. It'll contact info blocks and say, this IP is no longer required, release it so that somebody else can use it, and delete the host name so that it's no longer there. We also will delete the backup system, delete them from our backup systems, our monitoring systems, our security compliance tools, and lastly, Puppet, and eventually the system is deleted from our vSAN. So that is a summary of our evolution from a completely manual-based process, provisioning system to a completely automated system. Using these tools, we've been able to manage the life cycle of all of our provisioning systems, as well as the systems that we have created through that provisioning system. So I hope, Amber, that answered your question.
It did, and you talked about a lot of tools.
Yes.
And at the very beginning, we talked about that being one of the questions that we help our customers kind of walk through and come up with a roadmap. Can you talk about how you've reduced processes over time?
So as I mentioned earlier, when we first started, we were manually creating all our DNS entries, all of our Puppet entries, all of our monitoring, all of our backups. It was a long, tedious process, prone to errors. Now, we're able to use the workflow system in VRA. It allows us to do all of that in a completely automated fashion. Nobody's fingers are in there other than a pre-configured REST API call. It makes it much more quicker. It's very consistent, and we are less accident prone, and I am super happy that we have that feature now.
Yeah. So really a great self-service user setup for your end users.
Yes.
So what about infrastructure and scaling your workloads across the global IP network? What do you do there?
So we have edge nodes. At our edge nodes, we have multiple virtual machines that our NOC operators use, our developers use, our ops guys use. Each of those has a series of systems that need to be in existence at every one of these edge nodes. They're all the same. So we were able to use a third-party tool called Terraform that allowed us to build a specific set of instructions for Terraform. it would then communicate directly to our VRA provisioning system through REST API and use our existing infrastructure to push those out and build them in a really quick manner and ensure that each system is exactly the same as our others. So even if they build it through Terraform, it's exactly the same as if Steve down here built the system using the request forms. So been very happy with it.
Okay. Now, what do you do about security without slowing down your delivery time?
So I mentioned templates at one point, and one of the things that we learned was that we needed to ensure that from the start that our system's template was using the best possible security practices we could. So we began to use a third-party application called Packer. Previously, before we used Packer, we had an 80-step manual process to create a template. And again, user error was, caused problems with that. So being able to automate that and, have required specific systems users, specific keys, specific certs, specific operating systems, and specific packages through the template system is our starting ground. Once that system goes into our provisioning system before it goes out on the end, we also check again, is the operating system current? Is the packages current? And if everything is okay, the provisioning system will push it out into a production live system. While the system is live, we also use Puppet Enterprise to continue to look at our systems, to update the operating systems, to update for critical security updates for packages, as well as look for changes in configurations that may have not been intentional or were intentional, but our configuration system will revert those. We also use a security compliance system, which is a package of software along with a team of individuals that look for vulnerable pieces of software, also look for strange activity on any of our systems, and they alert us to those so that we can investigate and see what's going on. And lastly, we have begun to deploy through our infrastructure NSX to improve our security profile.
You've automated everything. Thank you for all those details, Mike. So I'm going to pivot back to you, Al, and go back to the future state vision we talked about in the architecture. What's ahead in the Telco Cloud Platform roadmap for your teams?
So when I mentioned Telco Cloud earlier, I discussed there's automation pieces that were really key for us. I talked earlier about our network automation. Mike's gone incredibly deep on how we're doing systems automation. But our developers, they've been doing this since the 90s. They wanted to start deploying modern applications. Everybody wants to do containers, microservices, the ability to iterate very quickly. And it seemed obvious to us as a VMware shop that Tanzu was the next step. Well, Telco Cloud includes the Telco Cloud Automation Platform, and that's just amazing. It allows us to build out Tanzu Kubernetes Grid, or Kubernetes, basically across our entire global network. We can, in an automated fashion, build it out at any location. We can scale it as needed. We can add namespaces. We can add more capacity, anything we need to do in a very automated fashion. So it was a perfect fit for a team that's already trying to automate everything we could. And in the few months since signing our renewal, going on Telco Cloud, and coming here today, we already have this operational. So working with VMware very closely, we've been able to build out Tanzu across the network using the telco automation piece. The other thing that we're interested in, but in full transparency, we haven't actually touched, is the service assurance piece Amber mentioned. It's a pretty interesting tool. It's root cause analysis, multi-vendor, can look at systems, networks, and try to really help you understand what's going wrong in your network, what's going right. It seems very interesting, but we haven't touched it yet, but it's something we'll check out in the future.
Great. What about any additional benefits for your team? Do you see any other ones coming up?
Yeah, getting rid of all those apps that were built in the 90s. So, yeah, it was somewhat funny because within the global IP network, we've been doing VMs in traditional workloads, and it wasn't until very recently that we mentioned the possibility of, hey, are folks interested in consuming Tanzu and having Kubernetes, and the floodgates opened. So we now have multiple teams of developers excited that we're rolling out the Tanzu application platform and ready to transform all of our incredible application platforms that do our network automation and other pieces today into modern applications so we can iterate faster and continue to be the best quality IP network on the face of the earth.
Nice, nice. Well, let me try and sum it up before we open it up for Q&A, and let me know if I missed anything. So really, you've been able to automate many of your tools and processes across your network with Telco Cloud Automation. You've been able to deliver on security and enhance it without any downtime. And you're going to use Telco Cloud Platform in the future for consuming more of the efficiencies when you're ready to do that. Does that sum it up? Did I miss anything?
You got it.
Okay, great. Well, I would like to open it up to the audience here for any questions you have for Al or Mike. Anthony? I know you would have one.
Yeah. So, Mike, are you guys with the NSX? Are you deployment? Are you going full IPS and DFW and doing the full security suite?
Not entirely. We're still looking at certain pieces of that, still evaluating a couple of pieces we had some problems with. But otherwise, it has been very successful in doing what we needed it to do. I mentioned to you that we had talked about private IP space, and that has been extremely helpful for us to be able to manage that.
As odd as it might sound for an enterprise coming out of a network, coming out of the 90s, which I just can't stop saying, we had a lot of systems still on routable IP space. The ability to use NSX and use the Geneve systems to actually get our systems on private space in a manageable system has been fantastic. And we've deployed microsegmentation as well, huge value for security. We're still working on the IDS, IPS pieces. They're a little more interesting to work with.
What's up?
Especially it's something that scale.
Yeah. Questions? Okay, well, I'm going to go back to the 90s around automation and say,
Not me.
for one last time, automation has gotten a lot better, I think you would all agree, since the 90s. And really, it's going to get even better with Telco Cloud Automation and Telco Cloud Platform. So check it out. If you can take our survey, it's right up there. And then I'm going to go back to that if you want to connect offline with these two, here you go. We're going to be here afterwards if you want to talk further. Can answer any questions. Leave that up there for a second. And then there's the survey. All right, well, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.